刘培元的英文教室知识阅读篇第97集，那这边是回顾之前的34到41，就是维基百科的法国。当然维基百科讲国家都很长啊，我们这边是截录了一些，所以在31到41集，我们把意思还有弦外之音都讲透了。好，那我们这边回顾呢，就是只念英文纯粹念英文所以你跟着我的这个字跟着我声音来看，或者你也可以跟着念自己在手机或平板上或者电脑上跟着念。那你也可以训练听力就是闭目养神或者眼睛看别的地方训练听力都可以所以你不懂意思的话，你就看前面如果意思大概你知道，你就可以这边就可以跟着念或者练听力好，我们分上下两集因为比较长分上下两集把它念完，听听我的发音，还有最主要听那个起承转合，还有中间哪些地方做停顿我现在有15个 YouTube 频道，不是只有一个，所以麻烦帮我按15个订阅一般都是以为只有一个所以只按一个，其实可以按15个，希望你们按15个那这边一个句子红色，一个句子黑色，这样比较这个好辨别，然后动词都标出来了是绿色字，基本上一个句子一个动词但是有的时候会两个甚至可以更多就是他如果用连接词或者用分号这些情况可以变成两个以上的动词这叫主句，两个主句那子句的动词不算那是辅助的不算。我们来念 France, officially the French Republic, is a country primarily located in Western Europe, consisting of metropolitan France and several overseas regions and territories. The metropolitan area of France extends from the Rhine to the Atlantic Ocean and from the Mediterranean Sea to the English Channel and the North Sea. The overseas territories include French Guiana in South America and several islands in the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans. France borders Belgium, Luxembourg, and Germany to the northeast, Switzerland, Monaco, and Italy to the east, Andorra and Spain to the south, as well as the Netherlands, Suriname, and Brazil in the Americas. The country's 18 integral regions span a combined area of 643,801 kilometers square and a total population of 67.4 million. France is a unitary semi-presidential republic with its capital in Paris. The country's largest city and the main cultural and commercial center. Other major urban areas include Lyon, Marseille, Toulouse, Bordeaux, Lille, and Nice. France, including its overseas territories, has the most time zones of any country, with a total of 12. During the Iron Age, what is now metropolitan France was inhabited by the Gauls. The area was annexed by around in 51 BC, developing a distinct Gallo-Roman culture that laid the foundation of French language. The Germanic Franks arrived in 476 and formed the Kingdom of Francia, which became the heartland of the Carolingian Empire. The Treaty of Verdun of 843 partitioned the empire, with West Francia becoming the Kingdom of France in 987. In the High Middle Ages, France was a highly decentralized feudal kingdom in which the authority of the king was barely felt. King Philip Augustus achieved remarkable success in the strengthening of royal power and expansion of his realm, doubling the size and defeating his rivals. By the end of his reign, France had emerged as the most powerful state in Europe. In the mid-14th century, French monarchs were victorious in the 100 Years' War with England. The Italian Wars with Spain followed during the Renaissance. French culture flourished and the global colonial empire was started, which by 1900 would become the second largest in the world. The second half of the 16th century was dominated by religious civil wars, with Catholics expelling Protestants, which has severely weakened the country. But France once again emerged as Europe's dominant cultural, political, and military power in the 17th century under Louis XIV following the 30 Years' War. Despite the wealth of the nation, the government had inadequate financial and taxation systems that could not fund endless and costly wars. Especially costly were the 7 Years' War and the American War of Independence. The French Revolution in 1789 saw the fall of the absolute monarchy that characterized an ancient regime. The French First Republic drafted the Declaration of Rights of Man and of Citizen. The Declaration expresses the nation's ideas to this day. In 1799 to 1814, France reached its political and military zenith under Napoleon Bonaparte, subjugating much of the continental Europe and establishing the First French Empire. The French Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars shaped the course of European and world history. After the collapse of the empire and the relative decline, France endured a tumultuous succession of governments, culminating in the establishment of the French Third Republic in 1870 in the midst of the Franco-Prussian War. France was one of the prominent participants of World War I, from which emerged victorious, and was one of the Allied powers in World War II, but came under occupation by the Axis in 1940. Following liberation in 1944, a Fourth Republic was established and later dissolved in the course of the Algerian War. The Fifth Republic, led by Charles de Gaulle, was formed in 1958 and remains to this day. Algeria and nearly all other French colonies became independent in the 1960s, with most retaining close economic and military connections with France. France retains its centuries-long status as a global center of art, science, and philosophy. It hosts the world's fifth largest number of UNESCO World Heritage Sites and is the leading tourist destination, receiving over 89 million foreign visitors in 2018. France is a developed country with the world's seventh largest economy by nominal GDP and the 10th largest by PPP. In terms of aggregate household wealth, it ranks fourth in the world. France performs well in international rankings of education, healthcare, life expectancy, and human development. It remains a great power in global affairs, being one of the 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council and an official nuclear weapons state. France is a founding and leading member of the European Union and the Eurozone, and a member of the Group of 7, North Atlantic Treaty Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, the World Trade Organization, and La Francophonie. Antiquity. In 600 BC, Ionian Greeks from Phocaea founded the colony of Massalia on the shores of the Mediterranean Sea. This makes it France's oldest city. At the same time, some Gallic-Celtic tribes penetrated parts of eastern and northern France, gradually spreading through the rest of the country between the 5th and the 3rd century BC. The concept of God emerged during this period, corresponding to the territories of Celtic settlement ranging between the Rhine, the Atlantic Ocean, the Mediterranean. The borders of modern France roughly correspond to ancient Gaul, which was inhabited by Celtic Gauls. Gaul was then a prosperous country, which the southernmost part was heavily subject to Greek and Roman cultural and economic influences. Around 390 BC, the Gallic chieftain Brennus and his troops made their way to Italy through the Alps, defeated Romans in the Battle of the Allia, and besieged and ransacked Rome. The Gallic invasion left Rome weakened, and the Gauls continued to harass the region until 345 BC, when they entered into a formal peace treaty with Rome. But the Romans and the Gauls will remain adversaries for next centuries, and the Gauls will continue to be a threat in Italy. Around 125 BC, the south of Gaul was conquered by the Romans, who called this region Provincia Nostra, which over time evolved into a named province in French. Julius Caesar conquered the remainder of Gaul and overcame the revolt carried out by the Gallic chieftain Vercingetorix in 52 BC. Gaul was divided by Augustus into Roman provinces. Many cities were founded during the Gallo-Roman period, including Lugdunum, which is considered the capital of the Gauls. The cities were built in traditional Roman style, with a forum, a theater, a circus, and an amphitheater, and a thermal baths. The Gauls mixed with Roman settlers and eventually adopted Roman culture and Roman speech. From the 250s to the 280s AD, Roman Gaul suffered a serious crisis, with its fortified borders being attacked on several occasions by barbarians. Nevertheless, the situation improved in the first half of the 4th century, which was a period of revival and prosperity for Roman Gaul. In 312, Emperor Constantine I converted to Christianity. Early Middle Ages. At the end of the Antiquity period, ancient Gaul was divided into several Germanic kingdoms and the remaining Gallo-Roman territory. Simultaneously, Celtic Britons, fleeing the Anglo-Saxon settlement of Britain, settled the western part of America. As a result, the American Peninsula was renamed Brittany. Celtic culture was revived, and the independent Celtic kingdoms arose in this region. The first leader to make himself king of all the Franks was Clovis I, who began his reign in 481, routing the last forces of Roman governors of the province in 486. The Franks embraced the Christian Gallo-Roman culture, and ancient Gaul was eventually renamed Francia. The Germanic Franks adopted Romanic languages, except in northern Gaul, where Roman settlements were less dense and where Germanic languages emerged. Clovis made Paris his capital and established the Merovingian dynasty, but his kingdom would not survive his death. Proclaimed Holy Roman Empire by Pope Leo III, and thus establishing in earnest the French government's long-time historical association with the Catholic Church, Charlemagne tried to revive the Western Roman Empire and its cultural grandeur. Chinaman's son Louis I kept the empire united. However, this Carolingian empire would not survive his death. During the 9th and the 10th centuries, continually threatened by Viking invasions, France became a very decentralized state. The nobility's titles and land became hereditary, and the authority of the king became more religious than secular, and thus was less effective and constantly challenged by powerful noblemen. Thus was established feudalism in France. Over time, some of the king's vassals would grow so powerful that they often posed a threat to the king. For example, after the Battle of Hastings in 1066, William the Conqueror added King of England to his titles, becoming both the vassal to and the equal of the King of France, creating recurring tensions. High in the late Middle Ages, the Carolingian dynasty ruled France until 887, when Hugh Capet, Duke of France and Count of Paris, was crowned king of the Franks. His descendants, the Capetians, the House of Valois and the House of Bourbon, progressively unified the country through wars and dynastic inheritance into the Kingdom of France, which was fully declared in 1190 by Philip II of France. Later kings would expand their directly possessed domain to royal to cover over half of modern continental France by the 15th century, including most of the north, center, and west of France. During this process, the royal authority became more and more assertive, centered on a hierarchically society distinguishing nobility, clergy, and commoners. The French nobility played a prominent role in most crusades to restore Christian access to the Holy Land. French knights made up the bulk of the steady flow of reinforcements throughout the 200-year span of the Crusaders, in such a fashion that the Irish uniformly referred to the Crusaders as French, caring little whether they really came from France. The French Crusaders also imported the French language into the Levant, making French the base of the lingua franca of the Crusader states. French knights also made up the majority in both the hospital and the temple orders. The latter, in particular, held numerous properties throughout France, and by the 13th century were the principal bankers for the French crown, until Philip IV annihilated the order in 1307. Philip's seat on the throne was contested by Edward III of England in 1337. On the eve of the first wave of the Black Death, the England and France went to war in what would become known as the 100 Years' War, with charismatic leaders such as Juan of Arc, Jean of Arc, and La Hire. The strong French counterattacks won back most English continental territories. Like the rest of Europe, France was struck by the Black Death. Half of the 17 million population of France died. Early modern period, the French Renaissance saw a spectacular cultural development in the first standardization of the French language, which would become the official language of France and language of Europe's aristocracy. It also saw the long set of wars known as Italian Wars between France and the House of Habsburg. French explorers such as Jacques Cartier or Samuel de Champlain claimed lands in the Americas for France, paving the way for the expansion of the first French colonial empire. The rise of Protestantism in Europe led France to a civil war known as the French Wars of Religion. While in the most notorious incident, thousands of Huguenots were murdered in the Saint Bartholomew's Day massacre of 1572. Under Louis XIII, the energetic Cardinal Richelieu promoted the centralization of state and reinforced the royal power by disarming domestic power holders in the 1620s. He systematically destroyed the councils of defying the laws and denounced the use of private violence. Louis XIV, the Sun King, was the absolute monarch of France and made France the leading European power. The monarchy reached its peak during the 17th century in the reign of Louis XIV. By turning powerful feudal lords into the courtiers at the palace of Versailles, Louis XIV's personal power became unchallenged. Remembered for his numerous wars, he made France the leading European power. 这个上期我们就列到这边啊，麻烦帮我按15个订阅啊，这一集讲到这里。